Bright Cutie. Every student matters.
And now we come to chapter 9, which deals with the topic the three orders. And as I mentioned, the Western Europe is the geographical region which will be our focus. So the three orders is the title of your chapter 9. And here we study the social, economic and political changes which came in Western Europe between the 9th and 16th centuries. So what is important is the geographical region is Western Europe, and the time period in this chapter which we mainly deal with is 9th to 16th centuries, and the focus is on social, economic and political changes. So no society is stagnant. It keeps evolving and changing. So when you study the history of that society, important is to remember that we are trying to trace this change which happens in the field of social, economic and political arena or political space. And we discuss in this chapter three social classes or categories. So as the name of the book, name of the chapter itself suggests, that three orders. So that is three orders. Orders are also called classes or categories, social classes or categories. And these three orders consisted of the Christian priests, the land owning nobility and the peasants. So these are the three major orders which we will be dealing with. The Christian priests are the first order. Then we have the land owning nobility. So the noble class, who are the upper class, rich and elite people of the society, are called nobles or nobility. And they were elite section because they had access to land and they were very influential. And then we have at the lowest strata, we have the peasants or the cultivators who tilled the land and worked hard. So majorly the society, the social division of the society was into these three different classes or orders. That's why we have the title of the chapter as three orders. And the focus of this chapter will be on the special features or how the society is divided into three orders and what are its specific features. So the changing relations between these three orders was a significant factor in shaping European history for many centuries. So the relations are changing. It's not stagnant or unchanging, but among the three orders there are social relations, and we'll also see how these relations are changing over a long period of time and how the three orders functioned under circumstances will be considered in relation to the three institutions they represented. So this change is reflected on the three institutions they represented, that is these three orders represented. So the first institution is feudalism, then there is manorialism and the church. So when we look at the changing relations between these three orders, we also will be looking closely at the three institutions which are important: feudalism, manorialism and the church. How these institutes are playing a major role in deciding the social relations and how these three orders are shaping these institutes. So the first institution or the social structure we will be looking at is feudalism. So the Frankish Empire, found by Charlemagne the Great. So although it's written as Charlemagne, we pronounce it as Charlemagne. This is how the name of this king is pronounced. So the Frankish Empire, it included parts of France, Germany, and some other parts of Western Europe. So this is what formed the Frankish Empire. And the founder of this empire was Charlemagne the Great, and it included practically all Western Europe except Spain and England. So the Frankish Empire consisted roughly the whole of west part of Europe, but no, it did not have Spain and England as its part. And after the death of Charlemagne in 814 AD, the great emperor Charlemagne dies in the year 814. And we see that after his death, the Frankish Empire breaks up under weak successors due to foreign invasions. So after Charlemagne, there is an absence of a very strong leader, and as a result, the empire disintegrates or breaks up into small kingdoms because they are attacked by foreign rulers. And as a result, the structure of central government collapsed. So as a consequence of all these political changes, the central government or the governance, which was initially in the hands of Charlemagne, who functioned as the supreme authority, now collapses. And during this confusion, and also the fall of Rome, the great Roman Empire also declines at this period, which is called the fall of Rome, also affects the social economic changes. And as a result, we see that various customs, that is ways of life. So different customs means different practices and traditions of people who live in a particular geographical area. So because of all these changes happening, like the fall of Rome and the death of Charlemagne and the collapse of the central government under the Frankish Empire, we see that new customs emerge in this period, that is around 9th century, that these changes are happening, and it results in development of new customs which will then help people to live despite turmoils. So this turmoil is confusion, chaos, and disturbance. So because of these political changes, ordinary people experience a lot of problems in their life. So in order to cope up or adjust with these changes, people develop or try new ways of life and new social structures. And as a result, we see a new social institution develop, that is feudalism. And we see by 9th century, these customs or new ways of life and new ways of social organization develops into a pattern of life. Here, the book says or defines feudalism as a pattern of life which develops around 9th century AD to deal with the particular kind of political changes which happen in and around this time. So feudalism has emerged as a new way of social structuring, a new way of life. Now we see what the meaning of this term is, what it meant, and how it is defined. The definition of the term feudalism. So we see that feudalism is the combination of two words, feudo and vassalism. So the literal meaning of it comes from two words, feudo and vassalism. So feudo is a German word which means fief. The meaning of it is a piece of land. So the German word fief, which means a piece of land. And vassalism means holding something from a supreme lord. So it's like borrowing and keeping something for a time period from somebody who really owns it. So you are not the owner of that land. Instead, you are holding that property which is owned by someone else. Thus, feudalism means that system of society where land holding is the basis of whole society. So most important to the feudal system is the land holding. Somebody is holding the land which he doesn't own, but it is owned by another person. So that becomes the basis of the whole structure. And in brief, feudalism was a brand of social relationship between land and man. So most important in the definition of feudalism is the relationship, the particular kind of relationship between land and man. On what conditions a man gets the right to hold the land? Who owns the land and who has the right to hold it? This is what is most crucial to the definition of feudalism. Lord protecting the man and the man providing service and reverence to the Lord. So here the supreme owner of the land is called the Lord, and the one who holds the land of the Lord has to provide services to the Lord. And in return, the Lord will protect the person to whom he has given the land to. So this was how the social relationship was shaped in feudal structure. Now we come to the main features of feudalism. So step by step, we are trying to understand what a feudal structure is, how it is defined, what its major features are, and what kind of relationship it has when it comes to man and land. How the relationship between man and land is defined under feudalism. So features, the first feature is terra regis. So this is a Latin term and the meaning of it is all land belongs to the king. So king becomes the most important figure, the supreme authority. And all lands belongs to the king or terra regis. According to this system, nobody except the king is the owner of the land. So the ultimate owner is the king. This is important. You must remember that terra regis says that king is the supreme owner of land. All those who have land get it from the king directly or indirectly. So whoever is getting land they are all getting land from king. Some may get it in a direct form, that is king is handing over the land to the man, and some will get it in indirect forms. So a man who has got the land from the king will then subdivide and give those land to other people. So in that sense or in that way, that person is getting land not directly from the king but from someone who has got the land originally from the king. And those who held land directly from the king were called tenants in chief. So this tenants in chief is an important category. They are influential persons because they are the ones who are getting land directly from the king. So that's why they are chief or important. And they are termed as tenants in chief. And the tenants in chief used to give their lands to others, and the system of sub-infeudation means giving portion of land to others, continued till it was held by the cultivators. So another important feature is tenants in chief subdivided or gave portion of land which they received from the king to others, and they then subdivided it among another section of people, and till it was held by the cultivators. So the cultivators were the last section to whom this land was handed over to. So cultivators belong to the lowest strata of society, and in their case they cannot afford to sub-infeudate or subdivide and give that land to somebody else, because if he has to live and take care of his family, it is important that they work on it, they till the land, they farm, they produce something. So the last section to whom the land comes to is the cultivators or the peasants, and they are the ones who belong to the lowest strata of this social order. So everybody down from the cultivator to the tenant in chief was a mere landholder, that is a tenant. So the meaning of the term tenant is a landholder. Important is to remember that he just holds the land, holds, not owns. He is not the owner, but he is just holding the land which belongs to the king. So everybody down from the cultivator to the tenant in chief, cultivator to the tenant in chief, are all holders of land. And he could not bequeath the land to his son. So this land could not be given to his sons as an inheritance, or the sons could not inherit this land as their ancestral property, because the owning rights, the persons who was holding the land did not have the owning rights. And when a tenant died, his successor could not succeed unless he paid relief or succession duty. So another feature is, when a tenant died, the successor or the sons or the children of this tenant could not own the land unless he paid a relief or a succession duty. So a certain amount of money was to be given to get the right to hold the land. And similarly, if a tenant died without leaving an heir, the land had to be reverted back to the lord. So if a tenant died and he did not have any offspring or kids or children, the lord had the right, whoever had given him that land had the right to take it back. So that is the first feature of feudalism, that is terra regis, which meant all land belonged to the king. Now we come to the second feature, which is no land without its lord. What is this? So here we see that in the feudal system, every piece of land belonged to some lord. So wherever you find a piece of land, it belonged to some person. The supreme authority is the king, and the king had handed it to the tenant in chief, and the tenant in chief then gave it to some other people, and those people then, on their convenience, had given it to some other sections. So it was very difficult to find a piece of land which was not owned by someone, or which was not held or belonged to a lord. The landholders from bottom to top had to provide several kinds of services to their immediate lords. So whomever you had got the land from, it was important that you gave them all kinds of services. It was mandatory that the tenants had to serve the interest of the lord, the immediate lord, that is, that whomever he had received that piece of land from. And there was not a single acre of land which was not held on some feudal principle. So that's why no land without the lord. Every piece of land was held was by somebody, by a lord. Third feature is commendation or personal services. So we already saw that the people had to serve their immediate lords and meet their demands. And now we look closely at what these services were. So a landholder in the feudal society had to provide many personal services at regular intervals to the lord. So this personal services, what are they? The man had to attend knighting ceremony of the son of his lord. So knights are an important category in the feudal structure, and we'll come to the definition of this term later. We'll be dealing in detail in this chapter itself. We'll be looking at whom knights are and what their significance is. So knights in simple sense is military men, that is, who provided military services to the lord and the king. So many times when the sons of the lords were made the knights or were given the status of a knight, the tenant had to be there and pay them money. So financial service had to be given to the lord by the tenant. And the tenant could not marry his sons and daughters without the approval of his lord. So this is how it becomes personal. See, the lord has the right to decide whom the tenants kids should get married to. So the lord had to permit or give permission so that they could marry the people of their choice. And it must be noted that land did not belong to the landholder. So this is the thing which we have already discussed. The first feature, terra regis, and the second feature, that is, no land is there without the owner. So landholder is not the owner, but he just holds the land. And he was simply having rights over it because he had agreed to perform services. This is a very important feature, that because the tenant has agreed to serve the needs of the lord, that he has the right to hold the land. If he decides to stop these services to the lord, the tenant ceases to have or stops to have any right over that piece of land which he has received from the lord. So the lord protected the landholder in return. So now we see when the services are provided by the tenant, the lord protects the tenant. So in certain ways, protection is granted to the tenant by the lord as the return to the services which the tenants are giving. And the landholder agreed to grant specific service to the lord. So this is a give and take which is happening. This is how the social relationship between a lord and a tenant happens. That the tenant gives services in different ways, and as a return to the service, the Lord gives them protection. Now we come to the fourth feature of feudalism, that is Lord's privilege of holding court for his immediate landholders or subtenants. So whoever the lord or the landholder is, he had a privilege or a special right. So the privilege is special rights. The lord had a special right to decide whom his immediate landholders will be, or whom to give his land to. So every landholder, every landlord had the privilege of holding a court for his immediate landholders. So that's how this privilege of deciding whom he should give the land to. And for example, the king, the chief feudal lord, so the king is called the chief feudal lord, held a court, curia regis, to try tenants in chief. So the king also had the privilege to decide whom the tenants in chief will be. It is not necessary that it's just one tenant in chief, but the king had all the land. So he used to have a lot of tenants in chief whom he personally chose to give his land to. And similarly, tenants in chief and the manorial lords held courts for their dependents. And as the king did, the immediate lords or the tenant in chiefs in their place also had the privilege to decide whom they should give their lands to. This is also the important feature of feudalism. And then comes the fifth feature, that is services to the lords. So every landholder was required to do some definite service to the immediate lord. So this is something which we have already seen, personal services and other financial services which is being given to the lord by the tenant. And it was mandatory, or it was a rule, that every landholder had to serve the immediate lord. And the great part of European countries was held on military service, that is the knight service. So along with personal services, it was important that they give military service. So they joined the militia or the knight group of the lord and be part of that militia. And so we are done with the features of feudalism. First we saw the definition and then the features, and now we come to the feudal pyramid or the organization of feudalism. How the society was organized under feudal structure. So this is called a pyramidal structure, because at the top of the feudal organization was the king. So you have king at the top of the pyramid. So you know how the pyramid looks like. Yes, the reason for it being called a feudal structure or a pyramidal structure is because of the particular kind of organization which the whole feudal structure has. And we just saw that king was at the top of this structure, and he was the owner of all the land in the state, and he allotted various amounts of land to the nobles or tenants in chief. And those who held land directly from the king were called tenants in chief. So under the king came a section were called the tenants in chief. They were called so because they had got the right to hold the land directly from the king. And the tenants in chief also subinfeudated or subdivided the land, among different sections or different people who had come under the tenants in chief, and they were also the lords who had holding rights. And these lords again subdivided the land which they held, and the land finally in the end reached the hands of the cultivators, who were in the last strata, because cultivators could not afford to then subdivide the land or give it to another tenant, because he lived in a very difficult situation, and it was impossible for the peasant or the cultivator to give his land to somebody else to hold. He had to work on that land which he received from the Lord to meet his day-to-day needs. So this is how the whole pyramidal structure of feudalism is organized. So those who held land directly from the king is the category of tenant-in-chiefs, and they had to provide military service to the king. So as a return, the service which the tenants-in-chief had to give the king was military service. And the tenants-in-chief further let their lands to subtenants. So under the tenants-in-chief came subtenants who had got the land from the tenants-in-chief. And these tenants-in-chief had to give services to the immediate lords. And basically how the king extracted from the tenant-in-chief. So like the king getting service from the tenant-in-chief, the tenants-in-chief also got certain kind of services from the subtenants, and the subtenants divided it among another section, and finally the land reached the cultivators who worked on the land, tilled the land, and cultivated the land for their day-to-day needs. And this process went on till the land was actually held by the cultivators. So the last strata in this pyramid is peasants or cultivators. And in the top we have the king, then the tenants-in-chief, then the subtenants, and finally comes the cultivators. Thus, in between the king and the cultivators, there were a series of lords and overlords. This is important. Between the king and the cultivator, there were a series of lords and sub-lords. These lords acted as judges, military captains, and protectors of their tenants. So, as a return to the services which the tenants were providing, the lords gave them protection, and they also acted as judges. Many times they decided on matters related to their tenants. And as the military captain, he was the head of the military group and gave them protection also. So on the other hand, landholders owed to their immediate lords. That is, owing means they had the responsibility to give services to their immediate lords. And military service was also to be given, and personal services at different occasions. We saw when the lord's son was selected as a knight, the tenant had to be there and give financial service or pay some kind of tax to the lord. So, and other military services, everything was to be provided. And these immediate lords were called mesne tenants. So, the immediate lords were called mesne tenants because in reality, these lords were also tenants. because the lords also did not have the ownership right over the land. And the reason is because the lord had also received this land from somebody above him, and that person had got this land from one above him, and finally we reached the level where we had the king who had the supreme authority over the land, and he was the only owner of this land. So we are done with the circumstances which lead to the coming of feudalism, that is the factors which are shaping the feudal society. Then we saw the definition of the term feudalism, the literal meaning of it, which had feudo plus vassalism, and where it came from and what those words meant. And then we saw the important features of feudalism. Around 5 features we discussed, and then we looked at the organization of feudalism, which is in a pyramidical form with the king at the top and the peasants in the last strata. So now we will look at some questions from the part which we have covered till now. The first question is, who was Charlemagne? So we saw that Charlemagne was the founder of Frankish Empire, which included almost all parts of Western Europe except Spain and England. And after his death in 814 AD, the empire, that is the Frankish Empire, broke up under weak successors due to foreign invasions. And we saw, as a result of this weakening of this large empire and the collapse of the central government, how new forms of life and cultural practices emerged, leading to a social structure which was feudal in nature, or giving emergence or giving birth to a feudal society. The second question is, what is the meaning of feudalism? We saw that feudalism is the combination of two words, feudo plus vassalism, and feudo is a German term which comes from the word fief, which meant a piece of land, and vassalism meant holding something from a supreme lord. Holding and not owning. That is important. Third question is, discuss the circumstances leading to the growth of feudal system. So the circumstances are the Frankish Empire, founded by Charlemagne the Great, included practically all Western Europe except Spain and England, and his death leads to weak successors, and as a result there is a collapse of the central government, and it leads to a lot of confusion. And since the fall of Rome, various customs, that is new ways of life, developed in order to let people adjust to this new political changes. And by 9th century, these customs developed into a pattern of life known as feudalism. So these are the factors which are leading to the growth of feudal system and a new pattern of life. The next question is, describe main features of feudalism. So if it's a long answer question, you will have to define and explain each of this feature. If it's a short question, you just have to name it. So the first feature is terra regis, which meant all land belongs to the king. So the king is the supreme owner of all land, and no land without its lord. It is difficult to find a piece of land which is not under the control or the authority of a person. And commendation of personal services. So the tenants were to give personal and military service to the king. It was mandatory, or it was compulsory for the tenants to serve the immediate lord. We call it immediate lord because above that there are several other lords. So the one from whom you got the land from is the one who is the immediate lord of yours. And the lord's privilege of holding court for his immediate landholders. So the king and the other tenants had the king and the other lords had the right to decide whom he should give the land to. That is the special privilege and the services to the lords. So when the tenant is serving the Lord in return gives them protection. So you'll have to go into the details of what kind of services the tenants were supposed to give, and in return, how did the Lord respond and how he gave protection to his tenants. And then comes the question on organization of feudalism. So this is something which we just now discussed. That is how that is a pyramidical form with the king at the top and the tenant in chief under the king. Then comes the sub-lords who gets the land from the tenant in chief, and ultimately at the lowest strata belong the most important and the biggest category, that is the cultivator or the peasant who tills the land and works on the land. Yes, now we come to the specific features of feudalism in France. How feudalism emerged in France and what its specific features were. So France, which was originally called Gaul, was a province of Roman Empire. So the great Roman Empire had a large territory under its control, and France, before it became France, or before the name France came, it was a geographical region which was called by the name Gaul. And it had two extensive coastlines, that is the area nearing the sea. So when the land comes in proximity with the sea, it is called the coastlines. And it had mountain ranges, long rivers, forests, and large tracts of plains suited for agriculture. So the geographical area suggests that it had a very fertile soil which suited agriculture. And from 6th century, this region was ruled by the Frankish, who were also called the French kings, and they were Christians, and these kings belonged or followed the religion of Christianity. We see that the French had very strong links with the church. In AD 800, the Pope gave King Charlemagne the title of Holy Roman Emperor. So Charlemagne was one of the great kings of the Frankish Empire, and in 800 AD, he received the title of the Holy Roman Emperor from the Pope, who is the supreme head of the Catholic Church in the world. And this further strengthened French relations with the church. So when these recognition was given to the Frankish kings, it strengthened the relations which France had with the church, that is the Catholic Church, one of the Christian denominations, and it had Pope as its supreme head. And feudalism first came in France. So this is important. It was in France that feudalism first emerged, and then later it developed in England from the 11th century, when William Duke of Normandy, Duke means a prince, and Normandy is a name of a province in England. When this particular prince had conquered parts of England, That is when the beginning of feudalism happened in England. And much before that, feudalism had begun in France. Yes, that's how feudal structure emerges, and particularly in France, we see how this comes into being. And now we come to the three orders. That is what the major focus of this chapter is, because these three orders are integral to the feudal structure. And in France, the Christian priests believed in the concept that people belong to one of the three orders or estates. So these orders are also called estates or social classes or categories. These are different names which are used to term these social classes. And these classes were divided on the basis of the nature of their work. What kind of work they did decided in which category these people belong to. So a bishop remarked, here below some pray. So one section, their task or their work was to pray, and some other fight. So for another section, their occupation or task is to fight or to protect its people by being or giving guard to the people. And then another section, their task was to work or till the soil or to involve in agriculture. So bishop is a very powerful priest in the Catholic Church who had special rights and who was a very influential person and a very senior priest. So thus the three orders of the society were clergy, nobility and peasantry. So under this feudal structure, the three orders consisted of clergy. Clergy are the priests or the religious section. They are the ones who pray. Their occupation or their task is to meet the needs of people when it comes to religion or religious affairs. And then comes the nobility. They are the section who formed the knights or the military class who gave military service to the Lord. And then came the last or the strata at the lowest level, who were the peasantry or the cultivators, and their task was to work or till the soil. So now we will look at each of these orders one by one and try to understand how they existed and what its features were. First order is the clergy. The Catholic Church in France had its own laws and owned lands endowed by the kings. So the Catholic Church in the feudal order and especially in France also owned lands. So from the king, the Catholic Church also received land, and it could also levy taxes, and as a result it was a very powerful institution. So this land could be then given to people for holding, and then the church could levy taxes or tax people and collect those taxes. So this very clearly shows how influential the church was or how powerful the institution of the church was in the feudal structure. It's important to remember the institution of the church and how it functioned in a feudal society. They could own land, they could hold land from the king, and also tax people and had the right to collect those taxes. And Pope, we saw, was the head of Western Church and he lived in Rome. The bishops and clergy, bishops who are the senior priests with special privileges and rights, and the clergy who are the priests, constituted the first order or estates and guided the Christians. So this is the first order, and that's how influential they were in the feudal structure. In Europe, almost every village had its own church where people assembled every Sunday to pray together. So this Frankish Empire was a Christian empire and they were very close to the Christian church, the Catholic church. So we see that almost in every village, that is the smallest unit of that empire, had a church. This church was important, and on every Sunday, people in that village came together in the church to pray. Those who were physically challenged and women could not become priests, and the priests were not allowed to marry. So see, interestingly, physically challenged people and women did not have the right to be priests. Only able-bodied men could become priests, and one important thing was they were not allowed to marry. And bishops formed the religious nobility. So the bishops were the noble class or the elite section with a larger influence on society. And like the lords, that is the landholders, bishops also had vast estates and lived in magnificent palaces. They are called nobility or the noble class because they also owned large estates, that is large part of land, and they lived in very big castles or magnificent palaces. And church collected 1/10 share of whatever the peasants produced from their lands. So because the church was the place where the peasants congregated on Sundays and prayed together, the cultivators of the land had to give tax to the church because the church was meeting their religious needs. So 1/10 of the produce of the peasant was to be given to the church. It was compulsory. Church also received money in the form of endowments made by the rich. That is, the rich people were also making donations. The poor could not make donations because they lived in bare minimum and it was very difficult for them to arrange money in form of donation. But the rich could afford that and they gave it to the church for their own welfare, sometimes as a sign of gratitude, and that of their deceased relatives after life. So in order to show their gratitude and in order to show their thanksgiving, express their thanks, many rich people donated large amounts of money. So the church received tax from poor sections and also large amounts of donation from the elite sections of the society, which made the church all the more significant and powerful. So within the clergy, we had another section who are monks. So they are a bit different because monks were devout Christians who lived in abbeys. So the place where the monks resided were called abbeys. They had a special set of solemn religious promises, especially not to marry or possess any wealth. So unlike bishops and other priests, monks had a vow or they had to make a promise that they will not possess any wealth. So they were not allowed to have large holdings of estates or to live in magnificent buildings like the bishop, but they were supposed to live a very simple and humble life. They remained in the abbey and spent their time in prayers, study, and manual labor like farming. So this section lived a very simple life and also got involved in farming and other such agricultural activities. And this life was open both to men and women. So here, both men and women could become monks. If you remember that as priests, only men were allowed. Women weren't allowed. No physically challenged person was allowed. But if you were choosing to become a monk, the women were also allowed to choose such an option. And men became monks and women nuns. So when women chose such a way of life, they were called nuns. And they lived under the vows, which means promise, to follow the rules of poverty, that is to live a simple life, chastity, that is to be dedicated and to be committed to the God, and then obedience, to obey the rules of the church. And generally, there were separate abbeys for men and women because both men and women could opt for such a life. We see that there were separate places of residence for both men and women. And like the priests, the monks and nuns were not to marry. So, as we saw, they were not allowed to marry and had to live a single life. The monasteries were large buildings with landed estates. Schools or colleges and hospitals were also attached to the monasteries. So another important structure like abbeys we saw is the place where monks lived. And then there were monasteries which included large buildings, and then it also had in its compound schools and colleges and hospitals. And these were the place where the clergy or the normal priests lived. And they also contributed to the development of arts like music. So in the monasteries, people were trained in cultures or in arts like music. And from the 13th century, some groups of monks called friars. So this friars is also a section of monks. They chose to move from one place to another, preaching their faith and living on charity. So from 13th century, we see that a section goes around and preaches their faith and tries to help those who were in need and try living a simple life and an alternative way of life. So though the Europeans became Christian, they still held on to some of their old beliefs in magic and folk traditions. So we see that it is only by the 4th or 5th century that the Christianization, that is Europe turning towards Christianity, happens. So before that, they had other indigenous religious practices. So some of the tribal groups had their own beliefs and other customs. They were not Christians before the 3rd or 4th century. So it is only later that the turn towards Christianity. But very interestingly, the Europeans held on to some of their old beliefs and magical and folk traditions. So even after becoming Christians, some of the old practices were still held on to by the people. And they celebrated 25th December as Christ's birthday. We know it's Christmas. And another important day which Christians had was Easter, which marked the resurrection of Jesus Christ after his crucifixion on the cross. And on such special days, people of each village used to make tours to their village lands. So they went on pilgrimage, that is, going to a holy place to pray, to express their thanks to the Lord. And the village was now called parish. So, interestingly, when under the control of the church, each village was now called the parish, which meant the area under the supervision of one priest. So, every parish had a priest as its controller, who was the authority in the church. And every village had a church where they came together on Sundays. And overworked peasants, so the cultivators who worked hard on the land for the whole year, welcomed holy days, that is, holy or sacred days like Easter and Christmas, because they were not expected to work on these days, because they were so tired of working hard the whole year that they looked forward to such sacred days where they got an opportunity to take a break and take some rest. They were required to make prayers, but they usually spent a large part of their time having fun and feasting. So it's obvious that when you get a break, people will try to take some rest and enjoy. So similarly, on these days, holy days which people got, although they were supposed to spend the day in prayer, people also took time to rejoice and enjoy their time. And pilgrimage, that is holy tours, going to very sacred places, was an important part of Christians' life. And many people went on long journeys to shrines of martyrs or to big churches. And as pilgrimage, people went to visit churches which were very big and which were very famous in some other part of their uh, area. And then some martyr shrines, that is, those people who had died for the cause of Christianity were called martyrs, or somebody who laid down their life for the sake of Christ. So there were places which were called the shrines of these martyrs, where people remembered them as great saints. These places were also pilgrimage sites, and the villagers visited these places.